Good afternoon. Welcome back to the B&H Event Space. You are tuned in to the Ultimate Portrait Lens, hosted by Sony. So I would like to welcome back after a long break for us, but not really a long break in terms of having you on, Chris, Mr. Chris Orwig.
Yeah, great to be here. This is so fun, Derek. I love getting a chance to connect and especially love getting to talk about this topic. This was kind of like the easiest presentation I've ever put together.
You've been waiting. I feel like the last
I've
the
been
last
dying.
presentation we did, you just wanted to get through it to get to this one because this is your this is the lens.
This is it. This is it. So yeah. And how are you today? What's happening in your world?
Oh, you know what? I'm doing good, man. We talked earlier and that kind of set my tone for the day, as it
Yeah.
always does. I tell you guys out there, why do you think we always have Chris on? Because it's like it's my selfish needs. Every time we bring you on, it's just a good Zen moment. I got some stuff out, aired some stuff out that it's just been weighing up here, and it's nice to just
Yes.
bounce it off of somebody else. So,
Yes.
how's
Yes.
everything with you? You
Yeah, likewise, it's good. We like as you mentioned, we talked at the beginning of the day for me, and um, it's nice to have colleagues and friends in this space and community. And that's, one of the things I love about the whole event space concept is I don't know about for everyone else, but I often just exist in my own world and I just do these things by myself or with assistants or whatever. And it's nice to, you know, chat with people and kind of connect. So that was good for me. And then otherwise, the other thing which I mentioned to you as well is we have 10 puppies in our house. And so I was just up there playing with them, getting them situated. And that's pretty magical. Golden Retriever puppies. And they're going home to all the families in about a week and a half. So
Oh, that's awesome. So you have it all lined up with the families and it's
yes.
great. It's great. It's cute. It's cuddly, but it's a lot of work.
Yeah, it is a lot of work. And before, this is a little side note, but I mean, I've been the one really raising these puppies, sleeping next to them the first few weeks, getting up, and then, all the things. And so, because my wife's job is she's a teacher, so her schedule's more fixed. Mine's a little more flexible. But I was telling someone, it's like my heart has been broken into 10 pieces because of these 10 puppies, knowing they're going to go off. But then slowly, as you meet the families, it's like that kind of Japanese pottery Katuchi or something. I can't remember the name of it, but where they take it with golden glue and put each piece back together. And so as I've gotten to know the families, I feel like my heart's now whole again, and getting ready for kind of launching these little puppies out into the world. So
That's awesome. Well, it sounds like it's been exciting over there, and we get
yes,
to continue the excitement because we're talking about one of your, not just ultimate portrait lens, but this is one of your favorite lenses,
this
isn't
is
it?
yeah, for me, this is it. So should I share my screen
Go
and
for it.
do it?
Let's take a ride. And for anybody out
Okay.
there who has any questions, as always, feel free to get them in.
Yeah. And let me just go full screen here and let me know if I'm all, oops, let me just do one thing, Derek. I'm going to unplug my second monitor
Go
because
for it.
that guy is still on. And then there we go. Now we're just on one. Is that full screen okay there too?
Yep, looks good.
Great. So this is so fun for me, as you mentioned. Ultimate Portrait Lens. I am a Sony ambassador. This session is sponsored by Sony. But the talk is relevant to anyone who photographs people. And because a lot of this is about this focal length, it's not necessarily about this particular model of lens. It's not a gear or tech review. It's more about what's possible when we have this type of lens, regardless of the brand or make or model. Um, as some people know, but just in case, I'm an author. I've written 7 books. Last one was about portraiture, other ones on other photography and creativity topics. And I'm kind of a goofball. I love to get out in the world, take pictures. I love to immerse myself. That was a self portrait on the left. And to just explore how we can live more fully. And often that means with camera in hand. Sometimes that means on a bike or surfboard or out with my family. And in this case, talking about this lens, it gives us this intensity. So I'm going to be showing some photographs that you can kind of feel like there's almost like a little bit of a gravitas with them. There's a little bit of deep connection, at least for me. And it just has this like weight to it that you're like, oh, okay, this is an image. And it works at different distances, up close, far away, facing the camera, turned away from the camera, um, horizontally, vertically, um, with families, with kids, um, showing more space, more of an environmental portrait. And so it's really a go-to in so many ways. And before I keep going on and on about the lens, I wanted to rewind to cover a few topics. First one is to remember, and I've talked about this before, but that portraiture is always a process. And I've showed this kind of sequence of this particular image that is using for this presentation as kind of the signature image for it. But that where you start off is often a rough draft and you keep revising to get there. And so a lens won't help you make magic images just because of the lens. We still have to have that craft. We still have to have that vision. We still have to embrace the process. And so I just want that to be kind of in the background, because too often I think with gear or with, I don't know, anything in life, we think if we buy this one product, suddenly, boom, results. And it doesn't work that way. Um, and so with that in mind, knowing that whether it's family and kids, again, with this lens, my daughter in the field behind our house, it's always going to be process. Oops, skip that one. This was just at a conference or out in a field. And in many cases, the process, like in this case, it was about light and posture and composition, or about connecting with someone in the right way for the kind of picture I wanted to create. So it's important to note that this lens, like all lenses, can create really, really bad photographs. Yet, it also can create really powerful images. I use a lot of different types of gear. This is just some of them, kind of my go-to kit these days. And eventually it'd be fun to talk about all of them, but right now, today, really focusing in on that 85, and it's the G Master lens that I use. And with this lens, it affords you the ability to get places you just can't get with any other gear, or at least I haven't been able to figure out how to do that. I also wanted to back up and talk about my last talk with you, Derek, when we were here talking about the 24 to 70 and how I said that was the most versatile and valuable lens that I use. And I would use it when photographing an astronaut, when photographing a band for album art, or a band a couple days later performing, or baseball player, more environmental portrait, or celebrity up close with a product, a bride in Yosemite. And that this 24 to 70 is this really powerful, really magical, amazing lens. If you haven't seen that talk, I recommend looking it up and checking it out, because I think these two talks really go well together. They're kind of paired well together and just kind of giving you some vision, like, okay, this is what 2470 is capable of. And this is an engagement photo, or we already saw that one. But the idea here, as I started to kind of assemble these, is that these two lenses together are like just absolute fire. I mean, it's kind of ridiculous. And as I've had to reverse engineer, like, how do I shoot? What do I capture? How do I do this? What are my go-to tools? If I only had two, this would be it. These definitely are the two lenses I use most. I looked through my Lightroom catalog and I was looking at the quantity of, you can see how many images you shoot with each lens. And these are my top by far, like they far, 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 my top two favorite lenses. So the G Master build, it is strong, amazing bokeh, amazing sharpness. I mean, these lenses, you can look this stuff up, but it's like, in regards to portraiture and the focus and the quality and all this stuff, it's just off the charts. But even more than that, I think it's the feeling that it allows you to convey. So if you haven't joined me for one of these talks, you know that I like to pause and step away from the slides every once in a while. So I want to do that so I can pause. And Derek, let's talk a little bit about a couple of things that we've covered. I'm going to hit the escape key and then stop sharing for a moment. And let's chat a little bit. What's coming in for you? What is this making you think? What questions do you have?
Well, I love that you brought up the last workshop that we did because it's important to look at every lens has its wheelhouse, its strengths, its weaknesses, or it's things that you really go to it for. And I think that we all start on a zoom. Most of us start on like
Kit zoom,
a
right? But
kit
go ahead.
zoom
Yeah, yeah.
lens. Yeah, we
It
get
goes
that
really
kit
far.
lens.
It's like covers everything. But anyway,
Yeah.
at least
And
that's
then,
what I
and
find out.
then we move up to like a good, like a professional kit lens, or I call it a professional kit lens, like a 24 to 70 2.8. It's like that
Yeah,
everything Swiss
yeah,
Army knife kind of a lens.
right.
And what's magical about this in the portrait lens is has nothing to do for me, it has nothing to do with the focal length. It's really just that separation
Mm,
of just the whether it's in a 1.8, a 1.2. So the 24 to 70 for me has always just been my it's like a vacation lens.
mm,
And the way I've always composed is to, you know, f5.6 to 8. Most everything's in focus. I'm composing, kind of the same way I do my wall here. I like things to fit in places. And
yeah.
for me, what sets the 85s apart is it's like that perfect sweet spot of really just taking out the noise. That's the lens I go to when I want to take out the noise,
Mm,
when I want to kind of just blur everything out. It's not too long. It still allows me to be, it's like that perfect distance of you're not compressing too much, but
mm,
you're not compressing enough. You still can use it a little bit like a fast 50 if you want to. It's still kind of close enough to that. You still have the closeness where you can get close to your subject. So it was interesting when, you said, you brought up the 24 to 70. Everybody should definitely go watch that. And I think it does. It leads perfectly into this. We kind of that kind of sets the table for what makes this so great and takes it into another realm. So I want to know from you before we go forward,
yeah.
what's the one characteristic about the 85? What's if you had to narrow it down to one particular characteristic, what is it?
For me, it's kind of singularity. There's a singularity to it. So I was trying to think of analogies and metaphors, and these are not great, Derek, but let me off the hook. But one of my best friends in the world, he's a really good cook, and he always comes over and makes something amazing. And he's always so frustrated with our knives because we have these old knives in a drawer that, and so he bought me a really nice Japanese knife, and it's just beautiful. It's like a work of art. And he said, Chris, this is the only knife you need in your whole drawer. Like you can throw away those other ones. This is it. And of course, you can't throw away the other ones because sometimes you need a small knife, you know what I mean, when you need to like cut something small. But it is kind of this, there's a singularity to this knife that it is just the quality, what's possible with it. There's a specialness to it. There's an experience you have with that. And then this is a different analogy. So try, still on the kind of the food thing, but I was thinking about like if you're setting dinner or if you're having dinner or something, your plate for me, the plate is like the 24 to 70. Like that's the bread and butter. Literally bread and butter is on that plate, right? But then the vessel, the glass and whatever you're drinking in it, there's a singularity to it. There's only one thing in it. And that's like the 85. And so again, together they like make this beautiful combo, or back to the knife thing, together this is great. Maybe have a smaller steak knife and then I have this one really big, beautiful Japanese knife. Um, and so again, I think there's a singularity, but I keep coming back. I kept coming back to this idea because at first I created this talk by alone, and I was like, this can't stand alone. This doesn't work alone. Because at least in my own workflow, I use them both together. And if I have two cameras, one has 24/70, one has 85. And so for me, both of those come together. So that was a long way of saying singularity.
I like that. It makes sense.
Yeah. Yeah. And special. It's very special.
Yeah, I mean, it has to add something. There's something, it has to have some quality that the 24 to 70 doesn't have, or else otherwise you're just, it's redundancy at that point. It has to have There's
Yeah.
just you need that magic lens, you need that everything lens, and then you need that lens that's like, and for everybody it's different. Sometimes for me it's a wide. Sometimes I
Yeah.
love having a super wide, and that's my
Yeah.
other go-to lens that I'll carry because I want to go and create a really different perspective.
Yeah. And to that point, I think you mentioning wide, what I would then ask someone, like if their go-to lenses, because I teach all kinds of students, I would say, well, what do you really love to photograph? And they won't necessarily say, well, I want like up close, strong portraits. And I'm like, okay, great. But if you do want up close, strong portraits, this has to be in your kit. You know what I mean? Like if you want to create like some of the images, we can jump back to them. If you want to create stuff like that, you just can't do it with the 24 to 70. You just, or you could maybe get close to it with the 70 to 200. But what I find happens when I have that lens and I'm swinging such a long lens around, really affects my subjects. And my subjects are more normal people and not like fashion models. I think if you're a model, you can really handle a long lens. It's not as intimidating. But for the rest of us, it's kind of like you get a little nervous. But the 85, you still feel compact. You're still, like you said, you're pretty close. So I think it is really dependent on what we want to create. And that's why this talk also hinges around portraiture, and I think portrait photographers for a long, long time have loved this focal length. And the reason is that it's not quite the way the eye sees. It's a slightly heightened version, but not too much that you're not recognizing the person. So it's not like if you photograph someone at 200 focal length like that, there's so much compression. It's kind of like it's amazing, but it's almost for me like too amazing, if that makes sense.
Hmm.
I want an image to be believable, to have this sincerity to it. I want it to have this authenticity. Maybe I think of it, like a guitar. I've compared lenses to guitars before. 50 is like an acoustic, 85 is an electric acoustic. My kids love Taylor Swift. I do too. But when she's on stage, she's playing an electric acoustic. So it's an acoustic. It still has that grounded feeling, but you can fill the sound to a whole stadium, right?
Hmm.
And then above that 7200 is like an electric guitar, maybe with some distortion. That's fun too. But for me, that sweet spot is that 85. So let me jump back unless
Yeah,
you have another thought, and
no, go for it.
let's keep doing this. And so back to this, I mean, it's all theoretical talking, and that's nicety. But then when you see an image, you're like, okay, there's a singularity to it. There's a silence to it. I think the heart really, like, and the deep emotions, at least for me, really come through in quiet moments. And so I think this lens is quiet, it's still, it's calm. I think with my 24 to 70, I'm searching a little bit more. I'm playing, I'm changing. I'm like, but this is just like, okay, all I have is an 85. Okay, I got to figure it out. These are two strangers I just met. I'm like, I got to make a connection quick. I got to find the light quick. I got to make it happen. And this lens affords that. And I like that I can step back, like the one on the left, or step forward, the one on the right. And I can use this lens in the spur of the moment. Like the image on the right, I was visiting Mark Seliger in your town, and we were just outside of his studio. And this was my friend. He and I were about to step into the studio, and I said, "Hey man, can I capture a quick portrait? Get him anchored, get him centered, get him grounded." He takes a breath, looks back at the camera, boom. It's almost like he doesn't even know anything's happened, but yet we've made a profound portrait in the mix of life. So this lens allows you to do that. Or on the left, it was like a commercial photo shoot. So I love that versatility. Again, you can see these are like these little caught little moments. So it still has a little bit of that flavor of that. Then there's like, I was photographing this young actress on the left, and then she was talking about she loved kickboxing or something. I was like, well, could you jump and kick? And she was like, oh yeah. And she just like did that. And fortunately, I can't believe I caught it, but like this lens allows you to have reactivity, quick reactivity, at least for me. And then on the right, that's a little, more like figuring out the space and the place. How does someone fit into a scene? Um, and then again, the one on the right, fitting into a scene. The one on the left, I was teaching a workshop and she was an attendee at the workshop. And I just love her hat, vibe, personality, everything about her. And so I just had her stand in front of a parking garage. And I love that kind of light that affords. But again, the lens is just like in the moment, I have the lens, I can create magic. This is with studio lights. Um, and in those studio situations where you have like the chance to set up, to slow down, and to really create something, what I think of as significant, is really wonderful. And what I love about the image on the left is I was there photographing her partner, and I was capturing some new branding images for him. And I thought she was just so stunning. And I said, "Hey, could I ever capture a portrait of you?" And she was like, "Oh no, you don't want a portrait of me." And that, people say that to me all the time. And I'm like, "Well, just come on, just stand in front of the backdrop, you know." And I love this portrait because one, it wasn't planned, and two, I think there's a strong connection. I think the light's beautiful. I think, you know, her outfit, everything about it, I think really works. But it's then the lens which affords the ability to add that singularity, that depth to it. These are, again, these capture moments. Actually, I already showed these, so that's a duplicate slide. But I guess what I was trying to show was kind of these, like, people are moving and raising their hands. They're not always, not, I don't always use this lens with square shoulders, eye to the lens. And let me just keep going. A couple more studio light examples. I don't know why my dissolve's going so slow, but it is. These are just using natural and available light and open shade, which I love. Again, open shade. I love overexposing slightly when I'm doing that. And then these I feel like are a little more natural, like at the beach and then on the football field with a football coach. And I just think this guy like looks like a legend. I mean, you know, and but I like that I can just have a lens and be like, hey man, can I capture a portrait? You're like, all right, you know, and or with a friend on the rocks, same thing. Sit on the rocks, lean forward. So there can be a casualness to it. But of course you can also, you know, really step it up and have like this depth and this intensity to it as well. So it's this, there's versatility to this lens with the many ways you can use it when you're photographing people. And these were both like test shoots. One was a test shoot on the right. I just said, hey, can I do a little test? And then the same thing on the left. I ran into this person at a conference. Hey, can I capture a portrait? Testing out a new lens. And I just love that it just gives you this chance to see really deeply, and I think to see towards or into the soul in some ways. At least that's what it feels for me. So it's seen past the surface. And I think with lenses, we often talk about like the bokeh or the fall off or all of that. Yes, yes. But more, there's a lot of heart and soul and feeling and expressiveness. And these are my last two images. The one on the left is a very recent photo, but he's a young actor. And I just feel like there's so much in both of these photos in different ways. There's so much kind of romance. So I think of this lens also as a bit romantic. And I think I romanticize this lens because it is so dreamy, allowing me to capture something really profound and deep, something a little more in the moment, something more pulled back, the girl jumping, and you get the idea. So I'm gonna go ahead and hit the escape key, and then that's the end of my slides. But maybe what I should do is just do this because this could be kind of fun, just as a little mini recap here. But just kind of thinking through, looking at these thumbnails, which I know are small here, but you kind of see like, actually it's small doesn't really work. I should just go full screen and just kind of rip through a few. But again, horizontally, horizontal at a distance, strangers, pulled back up close, little caught moments, jumping, environmental portrait, workshop attendee, fitting into the scene, studio stuff, caught moments, more studio. The fade is so funny how slow it is. Intensity, you know, and natural and deep, and you get the idea. So, man, what a lens, what a lens. Okay, I'm gonna stop sharing. We can talk. You can tell. I'm like, you know, I don't know what they call it. You know, they call it like bromance or something like that. But like, you know, yeah, I am in love with this lens. I love this lens. This lens has made my life so much better. the quality of my life, I mean, this, I'm going to go on here, Derek, ready? The quality of my life, the quality of my friendships, the quality of my work, the quality of gifts I'm bringing into the world, the pictures I've captured of people. I didn't show these because they're a little too emotional, but if one guy who has since passed away, and they're so strong and so valuable. We've talked about that before.
Mhm.
But I'm just so glad I didn't have a second rate lens or the wrong lens in that moment. And or focal length, getting back to the focal length idea. The focal length really steps it up. And what it found for me is when I photograph someone, I capture that image and present it to them. There's kind of a spark of a connection. There's appreciation, there's affinity, there's gratitude, me for them for me. And that's fuel. And as a photographer, that kind of fuel is really important because what happens in our world is no one's sitting around saying, "Hey, I want to call Chris to do something." We have to kind of generate our own momentum. We have to create work and share it and get it out there and continue and kind of create these ripple effects, so that we're sending energy out into the world. This lens has sent more energy out into the world than anything else. And as a result of it, there have been beautiful barters in my life. So this is kind of funny, but I'm just going to go there. One guy, he's a professional violinist, asked me uh, to his concert, and I got free tickets to see him play the violin. Seal, the singer-songwriter, free tickets to see him perform. Another guy was like a professional mountain biker. He's like, "Hey, Chris, I'll trade you a mountain bike for some education." And, I could just keep going on. I've been invited to Italy to photograph a friend's wedding, blah, blah, blah. But the point is, if I didn't have the 85, I don't think any of those things would have happened. I don't think, at least for me and aligned with who I am, I don't think the photos would have quite had as big of a reach. So for everyone listening, I think thinking about who we are, what we want to create, and what kind of energy we want to generate, and what kind of effect we want to have, what kind of momentum. If you don't have an 85 and you like this kind of work, you should consider an 85. Now, if you hate this kind of work, if you're like, "Man, I'll just go to my buddy Chris Burkhardt. He loves getting out in nature and he loves shooting really wide, and he's not doing a ton of up close portraits, although he does that." But let's just say you're a venture photographer, you do skiing and snowboarding. Um, Actually, I would take that back. I would say you still want this lens. I was trying to like justify not getting this lens, but because I think it's a both and lens. Like you could do all your adventure stuff, and then you could go to Iceland, you could do all the landscape, but then you could get the farmer leaning on the fence. So for me, I need both, but you can tell I'm stuck in this perpetual need of these two things. But um, I love this lens, Derek. I
It,
love
I'm
talking about
glad
it.
you brought it here because I didn't want to derail the conversation earlier. I want you to
Yeah,
let you
yeah,
get
yeah,
through your
yeah,
presentation, but one of the topics that was sitting in my head was what you're talking about now about, you know, to hear you say I wouldn't have had those opportunities if not for this lens.
yeah,
And you're gonna have people, the internet's a wild place. You're gonna have
yeah,
people like,
yeah,
oh come on, you could have shot that with any other lens. It's
yeah,
it's the photographer, it's not the gear. And it's like it's gonna be a conversation days long.
yeah,
But it does have something to do with the way you as a person respond, the gear that you're using
yeah,
when you have that setup. You know, again, we talked earlier, and the first thing I brought up was how I've been using a setup that has been on the shelf for a while,
right,
and it
right,
reinvigorated me, and
yeah,
I haven't put it down.
yeah,
And I'm totally convinced that I'm seeing things that I would not have seen if I was in
mm,
the state of using the other setup that I was using for
right,
probably the past 2, 3 years now.
mm,
And that's what this lens is to you. Is this is your it's your superhero cape. You go in the
yeah,
phone
it
booth,
totally is, man.
you change into the Superman outfit, and it's like you see differently, you feel differently, and that focal length transforms you into something else. And to use, we love our analogies when we talk.
Yeah, yeah,
It's like when you're watching the solar eclipse,
yeah,
and as far as like distortion and compression, and you start out wide and it's really distorted and there's no compression, and you get closer and closer and closer. I feel like 85 is that sweet spot when you have totality,
mm,
right? The moon is partially covering the sun. You're going to get great shots,
yeah,
but you're going to have different types of shots. Then you get that totality shot and everything's right there. And then it starts to move back out. And it's like all compression isn't good compression. Like you said, you get to 400 millimeter and it's like, okay, that's not even what that person really looks like. But everybody, I feel like 85, and that's why it's magical. Is it's that sweet spot. It's that balance between, especially when you go with a faster aperture, because you get the nice out of focus area, you get the nice fall off. Looking at your portraits with that you've shot wide open with the 85, it's like there's nothing better than when you have the eyes perfectly in focus and a nice little fall off to where the ears are out of focus and it draws your eye right in.
Yes,
So it
yes.
totally affects, it's the psychology of what we're using that totally affects the way we shoot.
Yes, I couldn't agree more. And I think to make it relevant to people is like really asking ourselves what makes us come alive. And again, I'll just flip it a little bit. I live in a beach town and I love the beach, so the beach makes me come alive, so I live near it and but I had this one friend who I was talking to him about my town. He's like, "Oh man, I would never want to live there. It's such a beach town." And I was like, that's a great insight for him to be aware of. And so he lives in the Pacific Northwest in the mountains. He just doesn't like the beach. He doesn't like the sand. He's, whatever. And so here I am, like, what I'm trying to say is like, I'm like, beach is amazing, like, but what that's not the message really. The real message is like, figure out what is your superhero cape, to use your thing. Like what when you pick up, you're like, yes, this is asking more of me, because some lenses do that. Like the 85 is one of them. You can't. Well, I was trying to show the process. You can't just be like, oh, I have an 85. It's expensive. It's nice. It's a G Master. I can be sloppy. It doesn't. No, it doesn't. It like creates really really bad pictures unless you're like, okay, game on. This thing's important. Maybe that's what I was thinking of the Japanese knife. It's like really sharp. So so when I use it, I'm always like, okay, no distractions, people. I am focused on chopping this carrot or whatever it is, right? And I'm like gonna chop this carrot so well. And I think because the knife is so nice, it also I'm not just like, oh, knife, whatever, chop, chop, chop. I'm like, ooh, here's my knife. Like I'm gonna do chop this carrot very well, and I'm gonna like, pretend I'm a chef or something. So it has to awaken your soul, ignite you, and even the bokeh part. Like we talk about bokeh a lot as being nice, and yes, it is. But what it is for me, it's like how the soul sees. And I think part of it is I'm ADHD, so I'm so easily distracted. But when I lock into something, I'm like so locked into their eyes. The rest of the world is crazy blurred out. It is gone. It doesn't, it disappears. And even more, I feel an energetic and soulful connection with them. And so I've always been searching for a lens that allows me to do that. Whereas what's harder for me is the wider lenses, because suddenly I'm like, oh my gosh, there's like everything to look at. I just kind of travel around it. So that one takes more effort, yet as I said in that last talk, it's the most valuable lens. I've made the most income from it. Um, but that's where it's so fun to finally be able to talk about both of these together, because they work in that way. So what I think we all have to do as photographers is not follow me, not follow you, not follow anyone, but get away from the marketing, get away from the label on the thing, get away from the number. All that stuff's irrelevant. Like they could, rather than G Master, they could have called it like X Dog, or rather than 1.4, we could have called it like 15.8. I mean, it's just like it's a made up reference, right? And so if we can just strip away all the labels for a second, feel that, work with that, and just say, does this resonate with what energy I'm trying to capture, what I'm trying to convey, for the vision inside of me? Is this helping me create something great? And is this also, this is kind of a funny part for me, but I'll be curious to hear how you respond to this. Is this making me a better person? I think part of photography's aim and goal is to make us more creative, more thoughtful, more mindful, more connected, more responsible. And I think, maybe for the landscape photographer, the wide really does that for them. They're like, I'm so connected to this landscape. At least that's for me in landscapes. It's got to be wide. I want to care for this landscape. I'm noticing things I haven't noticed. I'm grateful I'm out in this field in this moment. So for landscapes and environmental stuff, yes, bigger, but then for up close, closer. So I guess the question back to you is, do you share that, or how do you process that when I say this idea that, is this lens making me a better person?
Well, for me, I think if you look at how my whole how I've shaped my career in terms of education, I do a lot of educating, lecturing, mentoring,
Right.
and early on, it starts as textbook education,
Mm.
numbers, charts, terms, slides, bullet
Yes.
points, and I've shifted towards more of an approach how our conversations go when we talk. It's all out there in the ether.
Yeah.
My lens of choice, that's my superhero cape, might be way different than somebody else's,
Right.
but it's mine. It's for what I'm trying to do. And the way I've tried to educate and inspire people, it's not even educate. I think I'm more about inspiring people. I love seeing people go through their own process.
Yeah.
I put a buddy of mine onto photography, and at first it was like, no, I'm getting the new iPhone. I don't need this. I'm good. Yeah, I don't need a camera.
Mhm.
6 months later, he's like, "What was that camera you were telling me about?" It's like starts asking me questions, and it's so cool to see him go through the phases and
Yes.
learn on his own, and learn what he likes, and
Right.
learn what lenses are magic to him. And I think that's really the approach. Is there's so much out there. We live in a clickbait world where you go into YouTube and it's like this lens versus this lens, and I'm gonna spin this into a question we
Okay.
got
Yeah.
from the audience, but
Okay.
I think it should never be this lens versus this lens. It should be, what are your needs? What are your hot button items? Do you need to have autofocus? Do you hate manually focusing? Do you like a certain look? Do you like imperfections? That's where we need to go with more of these conversations where it's really, okay, can I make something out of anything? Yeah. It's like, man, we used to make grilled cheese with an iron in college. You put
I
It
love it.
works. You put a little
Yeah.
wax paper on there, a parchment paper, and you
Totally.
make grilled cheese with an iron because you had to.
Yeah.
And it's college, not prison.
Yes.
Um,
Yes.
but you work with the tools you have, and it's about your ingenuity. But it's really
Yeah.
about finding yourself as a person and a photographer. So to kind of circle back on your question there,
Yeah.
what are you trying to do with your photography? Is your photography tied in to you as a person? Because I think that's when you start making the work that you care about most, that you're most passionate about. I want to circle
Right.
into a question here because we are talking comparison. So Rob joining us on YouTube
Yeah.
asking, Rob has one of the Zeiss 85 millimeter 1.8s
Yes, I
and
have
is
that.
asking what the difference would be between that and the G Master. So it opens up this conversation of within every focal range,
Yeah.
you have options. And there's always a trade-off.
Right.
One lens does something great or it has some benefit, and it's something that maybe is a shortcoming or that another variation of that lens offers differently. So I could never afford the 85 1.2s when I was coming up.
Right.
And then I finally settled into, 35 to 50 was my range.
Right.
You have the G Master. Have you used the Zeiss or any
Yeah.
variations of, the 85 1.4s, the 1.8s? What are your thoughts?
Yeah. Fun question. Great question. So was it Rob who asked that?
Yeah. Hmm.
So Rob, thank you for that. Because I think it brings up a great kind of idea. One, it's like specific. So I can just say, I can talk specifically, but also generally to it. And first of all, because I've worked over the years with so many students, done all this stuff myself, is to always be like 100% content with what I have. And so this is more of like a Zen approach to life, I think, in the sense of like, right now I have the iPhone 13 Pro Max or something, and the most recent is the iPhone, what is it, 15 maybe? I don't even know. Whatever it is, I don't have the most recent one. But to that point, I'm never like, I'm never like, oh, if only I had the 15. Then I could really create a good photo in this moment. No, it's like what I have is absolutely amazing and perfect. Then now how can I use it? So this goes back to Picasso. He once said, if I don't have red, I use blue. And what he was getting at was like, okay, if I don't have something I'm into, I just use what I have and I make with what I have. And so never letting one of the weaknesses of a lens occupy space in my brain as a photographer. That is like really, really important. So I use that Zeiss 1.8. That lens is amazing, but I'm never when I'm using, I'm never like, ooh, if only I had the G Master, or If I have the G Master, which is heavier than the 1.8, I'm not like, oh, if only I had brought that other. So I'm not an if only guy. So first of all, get rid of if onlys and embrace. Then next, I think look at it very pragmatically. So again, cost of these things is the beautiful way that all these camera companies have figured stuff out is they have entry level stuff and then they have mid level and then they have high end. Same thing maybe with like Apple computers. You go buy a computer, you basically buy low, medium, or high, and that's it. There's not like and so you get what you can afford and then as you can afford more, possibly step up, but always embracing the beauty of wherever you're at. Then there's times where I still use that 1.8 because it's lighter. So when I have my smaller body, which I don't think I have behind me right there, but the A7C, I love that 85 on there, the 85 1.8. Let me try to untangle this for people who don't know these lenses. When I have a lighter version of the lens on a smaller camera body, it feels better versus a big, huge lens on a small camera body. So sometimes it's just about how do the lens and camera feel together. And sometimes it's about travel. Sometimes it's about someone's age and how much camera weight they're going to carry or hang off their shoulder or around their neck. So there are things besides image quality. The image quality is stunning with that particular lens, like absolutely stunning. Is it better with the one above? Yes. Is it worse with the one below? Yes. I mean, that's just kind of like the nature of how these technological things fall. But I always try to circle back to that idea of like, okay, Chris, you have this, and your job as a photographer is to explore how to see. Your job is also to be very grateful and to to explore how, at least for me, how photography enriches life, and I don't think we're enriched in life when we buy anything, guitar, car, shirt, hat, and we're like, oh, if only I'd gotten the hat that was a little bit nicer. But no, it's like I love this hat. This hat's great. Is that a fair answer to that question?
Yeah, totally. And I think again, it plays on what are you interested in and what is your situation? How are you using it?
Right.
I remember I looked back at images that I took early days, first DSLR,
Yeah.
and I look back at these images and it was the first time I had a crappy studio light with a softbox
Right.
and I had an entry level, $400 DSLR kit lens. And I look back at the images and I zoom in 100% crop. Wow, it's beautiful.
Hmm.
And that's when it really hit me. And this was really early on. And it's like, okay, I had the right light,
Hmm.
good quality light. I knew my settings. I had my technical part down, and the image quality reflected it. And
Yeah.
I remember thinking like, well, how much better could I get if I have a really good and probably yeah, like you said, better
Yeah.
optics.
Right.
It's just a physical thing. The optics are going to be better. It's like, looking out the window of my apartment or looking out a piece of optically clear glass. It's going to be a different view. But really, to go back to Rob's question there, what are the trade-offs? What are the things that you're interested in? Are you someone who carries a lens around all day? And
Right.
the
Right.
85 1.2 is going to be a brick.
Yeah.
Is it something where, do the benefits really are they worth whatever you have to sacrifice, whether it's more money or
Yeah.
whether it's, may not be
Sell
the
your
right
car
use.
to buy the lens. No,
Yeah. I
I say that because I had one of my students saying he was going to sell his car to get a new camera and lens, and he's this aspiring photographer, and I was like, okay, bro, like, but then how are you going to get to photo shoots? He was like, I don't know, I'll like borrow friends' cars, and I was like, okay, let's rewind, you know,
priorities.
priorities, yeah, and just finding the right flow, and stage of life and all of those things, and finding the thing that really ignites your heart, soul, and spirit, because a lot of times if something is you're really passionate about it, like you figure out how to make it happen. Maybe I think of it as a kid, I grew up an hour and a half from the ocean, and I loved surfing. And we just would figure out ways how to get to the beach. We would hitch rides, we would beg people, we would bribe, we would do anything we could to get someone to give us a ride to the ocean because we loved it so much. Um, and so it's you got to kind of align it with passion, with love, and if things start to align, then pursue that and get a little bit of a strategy to get there. Um, and along the way be content, with whatever it is that one has. And then the other question, the bigger question too, is like, well, what about different camera brands and different lenses? All cameras are freaking amazing now. I mean, it's unbelievable. And sometimes people will talk about, whatever camera brand it is, um, you know, and sometimes they'll see those videos of comparing the things, and one's like 2 millimeters better than the other one or something. I don't know. Of course, what you want to do is get content with your ecosystem. For me, that's Sony. I love the Sony space. I love the Sony workflow. I love the Sony. I love everything about it. And so, again, for me, it helps me create beautiful, strong art, and then also helps me, I think, grow as a person. And so, finding that match is really, really important. And listening to talks like this and seeing what resonates, and more importantly, listening for things that don't. And one of my mentors often told me that negative inspiration is going to be one of your biggest sources of in areas of growth. And what he meant by that was like, if you see something or someone do something that you really do not like, let that guide you. And I think I've used this example before, but I have a friend who's a career counselor at a local college here. And I was asking her, how do you direct students to find their career? They come into you confused. And she said, well, I asked them questions like, do you want to work indoors or outdoors? And if I'll get a kid who will say, well, oh, I could never work indoors. I have to work outdoors. She's like, okay, 90% of all jobs have just been wiped off the table. And so in that case, the negative inspiration would be like, I do not like working inside. That's bad. So then that directs to a good. So what she said was she asked a series of those questions that give a negative response, which lead them to the positive. And I think that can be a great source of inspiration for us as well. Because I think someone could look at my portraits and be like, well, they're great, but where's the landscape in them? I want to do environmental landscape portraits. Then it would be like, great. Okay, so you realize you don't want to capture like I do. You do want to capture like this. Use that negative thing as an inspiration to go find the positive thing. And that's equally as important, in finding our own voice and being true to who we are. And I think that's what all of this is about, all the stuff we talk about. Because for us, I mean, I think for everyone, once you do this for a little bit of time, you kind of realize like it's not worth like being a rip-off version of someone else. Like you try that, you're like, it's just, I mean, who needs another version of someone else, right? And of course, it's great to test and to try and to mimic and all that, but then eventually, it's like, how do we become true to ourselves? And what I'm trying to do is weave that question into gear, so that gear isn't just marketing specs, in particular focal length. So it's not just about all the stuff we read that sells the gear, but it's also being true to who we are. Okay, who are you as a person? And one last little story here, I think, is, and we can keep talking, but is my friend, Young Pueblo, famous poet, millions of followers. He and his wife want to get a camera, a Sony camera, and so they're like, Chris, what should we get? What camera body? We don't know anything about this. He's a poet. He spends his life meditating and writing poetry, and that's like all he does, in speaking too. Um, and so I did not recommend an 85 to him. His focal length, if you read his poetry, the way that he sees the world is a little bit more like a 50. I think it's very simple. He has very few words on the page, usually very sparse, always lowercase. And so just because this lens is right for me, I don't think it's right for him. I think a fixed 35 and a fixed 50. I think that's what I had told them, and a smaller camera body, because he likes small and simple. And I don't even know if I said two lenses, because he's almost just like, I think poets are minimalist usually, right?
Mhm.
Um, he doesn't want a backpack on with like six lenses and and heavy and all this stuff. So the reason I'm saying that again is finding what's true to yourself, and then getting input from people who maybe can help you find that. And I'm always doing that. That's why you and I talk so much, is to push each other along on this journey.
Yeah. I mean, look, a good companion, friend, colleague
Yeah.
who sees things the same way, but also from a different perspective
Right.
is the same as having that good companion lens that helps you see the world in a different way. And I think
Yes.
there is, we talk about it all the time. And I apologize for anybody who logged on and thinking they were going to get like numbers and charts and all that. It's like not today.
Yeah.
It
That's
is.
out there. There's a lot of that
It's
out
out
there.
there. There's so
Yeah.
much of it out there, but I
Yeah.
think there's not enough of conversation about like, yeah, what do you beyond the numbers, beyond the measurements and all that.
Yes.
It
Yes.
ties into life, and I think that's really the important takeaway from today is yes, a lot of people are going to argue that 85 is the perfect. It it's a
Yeah.
great. If
Yeah.
it's not the perfect portrait
Yeah.
lens, it's damn close for
Right.
98% of the
Right.
photography
Right.
population.
Yeah.
Um, for valid reasons, but ultimately it's why does it work for you? Which version is right for you, which maybe you're not in 85, maybe you're in the minority of people who are like, no, I want to go super wide. I love a wide. Yeah, I used to love taking portraits at 24 millimeters. That used to be my jam.
Yeah.
um but it's really about diving deeper, and I think that connection, and we talk about this all the time, of who you are as a person commingled with who you are as a photographer. It's like the two are interchangeable, and the more you align those two, you start to tune into your work in a different way. And that kind of relates to the gear without going, way far out on the reservation here and stretching things. There's a tie. There's a tie to it. And I think as I've grown as a photographer and as a person, it makes these decisions easier. I still, in terms of photography gear, there's other gear that I'm not so versed in, and you buy things and it's like, I got stuff back here that I never use, or I bought it thinking I was going to use it
Right.
and I don't. But as
Right.
far as gear and lenses and bodies and all of that, I know where I'm at. I know the way I see. I know what I respond to. I know where my superhero cape is. And I think that's for all the people out there watching, listening, you have to look at you as as a person, who you are as a person and a photographer, and that's what makes the decision for you. What is the right lens for which, and what is your go-to? What is your everyday carry? It's like Young Pueblo. I vibe with that light setup for a long time. It was like whatever the lightest setup is, I'll work with it.
Yeah.
The major factor was not being burdened with gear. Lately, I've been carrying a heavier setup. And I'll end it right here with, for my thoughts with, as you grow as a photographer, as a person, you realize that the journey is the destination. There is no real destination. You never get to a point where you're like, okay, I can just put it on autopilot. We're constantly changing. We're constantly responding to life stimuli differently. We're constantly being introduced to new things. We're growing, we're progressing, whatever adjective you want to slap on it. And with that, you have to constantly stay in tune to who you are as a person, who you are as an artist. It's okay for our gear to change. It's okay for us to go through and it's like, okay, well, I don't use this anymore. I'm kind of in this zone now. I think that is a great signal for a lot of people of a healthy progression as an artist. And some people are always going to be, hey, I shoot black and white. I only shoot 35 millimeter. This is it. I only shoot one thing. And that's great for some people. But I think for a lot of people, it's a growth process. And you move through stages, you go through ebbs and flows, you go through highs and lows, and you know, you're gonna have a 70 to 200 stage, you're gonna have a 24 to 70 stage, you might have a fixed lens camera stage, but it's growth. And it's really just responding to who you are as a person and a photographer at any given moment in your life and your career. And I'll leave it there.
I love it.
That
I love it.
resonate?
Yeah, that resonates totally. And maybe to add on to it, I think that willingness, to make that change. I think, fitness, the science for fitness has said, I think like every 45 days, I could be wrong, but you want to rotate the type of fitness you're doing. If you just do the same thing year round, you're actually not going to become fitter. So for me with the 85, there's a point where it becomes easy. Like I'm just jamming. I'm like, this is like so easy. And so I know in those moments, okay, it's time to set this thing down. It's time to go befriend my 50. It's time to relearn how to shoot with that one, or it's time to do more 20 or whatever it is. And or I grew up kind of cut my teeth on the 50. I love the 50. And then finally I was like, you know what? It's time. This is kind of getting easy. And then I introduced 85 and I was just like, oh my gosh, 85 overwhelmed me. But being willing to be flexible is kind of what I hear you say, that the way that we grow as photographers is finding what really resonates with us, but then always kind of there's a cyclical pattern to growth and to exposing yourself to new ways of working. Like you're shooting with medium format stuff right now. You were talking about when on the phone earlier, how that's giving you the ability to crop more because you have a bigger image. So you're kind of shooting with a little more freedom around the edges, which is a great experience. And then you could go to an APS-C sensor or something and have the opposite, right? And both of those are valuable. And the trick with the craft of photography and how you get good fast is, I think, tuning into yourself, asking yourself, who are you? What's your vision? What do you care about? All that kind of stuff. But then back to what you were saying, Derek, was this idea of continually growing and that's what photography is. And the people who get really good at photography, back to your idea, it's the journey, not the destination. There is no destination photography. It might be kind of like in, I don't know, what's another sport, like tennis or something. I don't play tennis, but it's not like suddenly you're good at tennis and it's not interesting. Like you're never good at it. You know what I mean? You're always trying, you're always making mistakes. I think all the good sports, basketball, all the, mountain biking, you're always crashing, surfing, you're always falling. And so photography too. And being open to that and seeing gear as a unique way of embracing that and saying, okay, whatever I have is good enough. This is the ticket for the moment. How do I make the most with what I have? Which really stretches you creatively to ways you couldn't have been stretched without that specific gear, right?
Embracing it. I like that. That'll be the end note right there. Embrace what you have. Going back to Rob's question, embrace it. Embrace
Right.
what you have. If it's not fulfilling your needs
Yeah.
at a certain time and it's time to move on, or maybe it's time you want to try something different,
Yeah.
go with it. But embrace what you have. I like that.
Yeah.
Chris, always good jamming with you,
Good
man.
man. Woo.
Yes, well, for all of you, Chris is always a staple here. So we'll have more Chris coming up in the coming months. So stay tuned for that. And a huge thank you to everybody tuning in. If you have not already, go check this out and the rest of our recorded content on our YouTube page. Just look up B&H Event Space on there. Huge thank you to Sony and Chris for hosting today's event. That is all we have. Another edition of the B&H Event Space now in the books. Catch y'all next time.